Right now, scientists are debating whether a quarter, a third, or fully half of all mammals will be extinct by the year 2050. In fact, some of them are debating whether the planet will be supporting life at all by the end of this century. What's not up for debate, not ever, is a way of life that is turning the planet to dust. That dust is not hyperbole. The dust storms in China, the inevitable endpoint of agriculture, the dust storms are so bad that they are triggering asthma in Denver, Colorado. So here's the dust leaving China, heading over the Pacific, and here it is landing in Colorado. My planet's being murdered. It's being murdered by a way of life that's based on overshooting the land's carrying capacity, especially through extractive activities. And the name for that is civilization. So civilization, that just means people living in cities. But what that means is that they need more than the land can give. The food, water, energy, they have to come from somewhere else. So from that point forward, it doesn't matter what lovely, peaceful, nonviolent values people might hold in their hearts. The society is dependent on imperialism and genocide. Because no one willingly gives up their land, their water, their trees. But since the city has used up its own, it has to go out and get those from somewhere else. And that's the last 10,000 years in 3 sentences. Okay, back up 2.3 million years. That's when the genus Homo arrives on the plains of Africa, and that's us. Lauren Cordain, who's an expert in Paleolithic nutrition, he uses this image of a football field to bring this home. If that whole length of that field is our time on Earth, the last half a yard represents the length of time that we've been doing agriculture. In fact, the last 1/5 of an inch of that field, that would be the Industrial Revolution, including industrial foods. Now my point here is that for all of that time, for 2.5 million years, we were not monsters and destroyers. We were participants. Don't let anyone tell you it's human nature that's the problem. So it's only that last half a yard where the disaster begins. In 7 different places around the world, people completely changed their way of life with this activity called agriculture. So, you have to understand what agriculture is. In very brute terms, you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it to human use. So, it's biotic cleansing. That's not agriculture on a bad day, that's what agriculture is. So this is South Dakota on the first day of the Dust Bowl. So the first problem is that it lets the human population grow to some really big numbers, because instead of sharing that land with millions of other creatures, you're only growing humans on it. The second big problem is that you're destroying the topsoil, and soil is the basis of life, or land life anyway. We owe our entire existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. So except for the 46 last remaining tribes of hunter-gatherers, the human race has made itself dependent on agriculture, on an activity that is killing the planet. Now this is not a plan with a future, it's drawdown. And what you're drawing down is fossil soil. To give you a number, 1 season of planting your basic row crop, your basic annual crop, wheat or corn or soy, whatever, you can destroy 2,000 years of soil in 1 season. So this is the first day of the Dust Bowl. There were farms in South Dakota that lost all their soil in 1 day. This is Iraq, one of the places where agriculture started. No one in their right mind would call this place the Fertile Crescent now. Here's Iran. 90% of the agricultural land is degraded. What you see in the distance is not a mountain. That is a dust cloud of soil. 1/3 of Pakistan is gone. This used to be a deciduous forest, a teak forest, and this is what it looks like now. So when you destroy soil, you're destroying the basis of life. Jared Diamond, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, he said that agriculture was the biggest mistake the human race has ever made. Toby Hemingway calls sustainable agriculture an oxymoron, and Richard Manning uses exactly the same sentence. Richard is worth quoting. No biologist, or anyone else for that matter, could design a system of regulations that would make agriculture sustainable. Sustainable agriculture is an oxymoron. It mostly relies on an unnatural system of annual grasses grown in a monoculture, a system that nature does not sustain or even recognize as a natural system. We sustain it with plows, petrochemicals, fences, and subsidies because there is no other way to sustain it. Now you can burn those 4 sentences into your brain. Agriculture is the most destructive thing that people have done to the planet. Agriculture is the single most destructive human activity. So in case you can't tell what's going on here, this is the St. Croix River. The blue area is part that comes through intact forest. The brown, that's water that's filled with soil that runs through the agricultural areas. And here are the two branches coming together. So remember what agriculture is. You pull down the forest, you rip up the prairie, you drain the wetlands, you destroy the living communities that the planet naturally creates, and which should be habitat for millions of creatures doing that basic work of life. It turns into salt and dust. Agriculture is carnivorous. What it eats is entire ecosystems, and that's what it's done across the globe. So to state the obvious, no culture that is destroying the basis of life can be called sustainable. Really? It can only be called insane. So by the year 1950, this planet was pretty much out of topsoil. And what happened next was called the Green Revolution. Now this was based on fossil fuel. And at this point, if you're eating grain, you're eating oil on a stalk. You're not just eating fossil soil, you're eating fossil fuel. It takes the equivalent of 3 to 4 tons of TNT per acre for a modern American farm. Iowa alone uses the energy equivalent of 4,000 Nagasaki bombs every year. When I talk about this as being a war against the planet, that is not a metaphor. I mean it literally. So this has been a disaster for the planet, it's mass extinction, it's backbreaking labor, and this is all for piss-poor nutrition. An archaeologist can look at a bone and tell in 3 seconds whether it was from a hunter-gatherer or an agriculturalist. So these pictures represent some of the diseases that agriculturalists get. The hunter's bones are long and strong and generally disease-free. They may show signs of periodic hunger, but you don't have these chronic diseases. The first thing that happens when people take up agriculture is that they shrink 6 inches and they lose their teeth. And so these are the deficiency diseases that you see in the archaeological record. So really, the only actual question is why anybody took it up at all, when it is so obviously beastly. And the answer is, we don't know. What I do know is that 98% of the old-growth forests are gone, and 99% of the grasslands are gone. They've been destroyed by the disaster that is agriculture. But what I also know is that anything humans can do, they can undo. So here are 2 models. I'll let you decide which one makes more sense. Scenario 1. You can take an acre of land, rip the life off it, extirpate the creatures great and small who live there, destroy the nearby streams and ultimately the water table itself, expose the soil, and plant corn. That corn can go to a cow, live a miserable life in a feedlot. The corn will make her even more miserable and sick. The meat from that cow will be cheap, as corn makes cows get really fat really quickly, but it will also make humans sick, as both the amino acid profile and the fatty acid profile will be wrong, because corn is the wrong diet for cows. They're supposed to eat grass. So this is nothing but death and destruction from beginning to end. Scenario 2. You could leave that same acre in perennial grasses. You can let the American goldfinches and the prairie king snakes, black-pooted ferrets have their homes. You can keep the soil out of the streams and let the deep-rooted plant roots recharge the water table as they are supposed to do. You can even build topsoil. You can do all this and produce the same amount of food for humans, 1 cow's worth of beef. Only that beef will have a perfect amino acid profile and a perfect omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. It will meet the needs of the human nutritional template. Or, even better, you could do it with bison, but that's a discussion for a different day. Regardless, this could go on until the sun burns out. This is participation in the cycle of life, not destruction of the cycle. By some estimates, we could also stop global warming dead in its tracks. If we were to restore 75% of the world's trashed grasslands by returning them to grass and ruminants, in 15 years, we could sequester all of the carbon that's been released by the industrial age. All of it. The community of grass and ruminants is the only hope we have. This was our first art project, the first images the human brain ever made. This was the second most common art project. So it was the megafauna and the megafemales, because that was who gave us life. I think this is the beginning of religion, and that the sacredness of awe and thanksgiving is built into us, body and brain, so it's still there, waiting for us, calling us home. You love something or you wouldn't be here today. Whatever you love, it is under assault. Love is a verb. We have to let that love call us to action.